Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can analyze the mental health and personality factors that may be at work in the Marshall Applewhite case. He was the leader of the Heaven's Gate cult. Just a reminder that I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. So here I'll take a look at the background and timeline. So look at Marshall Applewhite and then the deaths of the Heaven's Gate cult members, and then take a look at the mental health and personality factors. So starting with the background, Marshall Herff Applewhite Jr. was born in Spur, Texas on May 17, 1931. His father was a Presbyterian minister, and Applewhite became actively involved in religious pursuits from a young age. By all accounts, he had a fairly uneventful childhood. He graduated in 1952. He was married the same year. In 1956, he enrolled at the University of Colorado, where he would earn a master's degree in music. In the early 1960s, he traveled to New York City and tried to become successful as an actor, but that didn't work out. After that, he worked as a professor at the University of Alabama. He was fired for having an affair with a male student, and when his wife found out, they separated. They would get divorced in 1968. Applewhite then went to Houston, Texas, and he taught music at the University of St. Thomas. There is a reason to believe he was having an affair with a male student here as well. Applewhite left that position claiming he had emotional problems, including depression. Reports indicate that he was disorganized and could not keep his thoughts straight near the time that job ended. His depression was severe, and he may have been psychotic. Some believe this was a first-break psychosis caused by schizophrenia. He was hospitalized for a period of time here in a mental health facility. Applewhite befriended a woman named Bonnie Lou Nettles in 1972. She had a history of looking forward to being taken by aliens. So she believed that there were UFOs and extraterrestrials were visiting the planet Earth. Together they came to believe that they were the two referenced in the book of Revelation. So essentially, their belief system revolved around this idea that Applewhite and Nettles were saviors sent to the world from the kingdom of heaven. They believed the world was in the end times. So they were from another dimension. They needed to get back to that dimension, and it was their job to bring other people with them upon their return. They thought that they needed to separate people from their earthly needs and desires to complete that mission. When the mission was complete, a spaceship would take them to the next level. Eventually, Applewhite started referring to himself as Doe. This name was selected because of his interest in music, but I find it interesting because it's also a term used by Homer Simpson when he makes a catastrophic error. Applewhite and Nettles started spending time traveling together. Eventually, they started to believe that they were exempt from the laws of the planet Earth, as evidenced by the credit card fraud they committed in 1974. Even though they escaped the legal consequences of that crime, the charges were dropped, Applewhite would be arrested again for stealing a rental car. He said that he was divinely authorized to keep that car. Applewhite was sentenced to 6 months in earthly prison for that offense. While in prison, he communicated with Bonnie Nettles, and they refined their belief system. He became increasingly interested in her ideas around extraterrestrials. After his release, they started recruiting members into their new cult. They referred to the group as the Crew. They would eventually become known as Heaven's Gate. They grew up to 20 members in 1975. At their largest, they would have over 200 in their group. They started to be more selective and only keeping members who followed their rules. For example, nobody in the group was allowed to lie, have sex, drink, or smoke. The members all tried to appear similar. They wore the same baggy clothing, they all had short hair, they even had similar diets. The group had been living in campgrounds in the 70s, but in the 1980s they started renting houses in Colorado and Texas. Some of the members would use fictitious names and gain employment to help fund the operation. Applewhite started to increase his level of control over the group. They were mostly restricted from contacting family members. In 1985, Bonnie Nettles died of brain cancer, which seemed to derail the operation for a time. Applewhite had to make some changes to his belief system to explain how Nettles could have died in this way. She was supposed to be a messenger from the kingdom of heaven, So he explained her death by saying that she had too much energy to remain in human form. Up until this point, Applewhite had told the members that they could beam up to a spaceship, again, that would pick them up and take them to the kingdom of heaven. When they beamed up to the spaceship, it would be their body and soul. Now he had to change this idea so that they would have to physically die to make the journey, right? So he made this adjustment, again, because of Nettles' death. At this time, Applewhite became increasingly depressed and paranoid. By the late 1980s, Applewhite seemed to recover a bit from Nettles' death and was back at work spreading information about the cult. In the early 90s, the group even produced a series of videos that they broadcast via satellite. These videos talked about advancing to this next evolutionary level. Applewhite and several other male members were castrated voluntarily. They went to Mexico to have it done. They did this so they could avoid temptation and remain celibate. Evidently, they were smiling and giggling right before that procedure. In 1995, we see the comet Hale-Bopp was discovered, giving Applewhite a new opportunity to build on his belief system. He insisted that it was a spaceship and the tail of that comet, and that he and his members would have to die to make a journey to that spaceship. The spaceship's ultimate destination was the kingdom of heaven. In 1996, the group rented a house in an upscale neighborhood in Rancho Santa Fe, California. It was $7,000 a month. They were operating a computer business and used the internet to recruit members. So their business and their marketing efforts were congruent. The business actually made quite a bit of money, about $400,000 a year. Now moving to March of 1997, the members of the group go out to a restaurant in Carlsbad, California. This will be their last meal. They all ate exactly the same thing. Reports indicate that they were friendly, polite, and no one seemed depressed. Over the course of the next 3 days, 39 members of the Heaven's Gate cult, including Applewhite, dressed in black tracksuits and wore Nike Decade sneakers, as they consumed a combination of phenobarbital, hydrocodone, and alcohol. Some also put plastic bags over their heads. As the members died from doing this, the remaining members would place a purple shroud over their bodies. Eventually, of course, all of them would die. Their bodies were discovered on March 26th. Now moving to the mental health and personality factors, we see that Applewhite had a history of depression. He had talked about how he had heard voices in his head. It does seem likely that he had schizophrenia, paranoid type. He also seemed to have grandiose features. It's also possible that he had shared psychotic disorder with Bonnie Nettles. Both of them seemed to have reality testing issues. In terms of his personality, looking at the 5-factor model, we see he appears to be high in openness to experience. He had fantasies about spaceships taking him away. He appeared to have high conscientiousness. He ran a business. Before his death, he bought alien abduction insurance for 50 of his members. So a side note here, this seems like a pretty safe bet on the part of the insurance company, right? This is 100% profit. Even if an alien abduction did occur, paying claims would be the least of anyone's problems because there would have been an alien abduction, right? So it's kind of like offering exploding Earth insurance. Who's going to be left to collect the claim, right? So probably the most effective insurance scam there really is. But apparently this is a real thing. Apparently there are companies that offer this type of insurance. Now moving to extroversion, we see he had mid to high extroversion. He taught his followers in classrooms every day. He had mid-level agreeableness. Most everybody thought he was somewhat friendly and even caring. He had mid to high neuroticism. He had depression, difficulty regulating emotions, and difficulty with temptation. That kind of explains him being castrated. Again, he wanted to avoid acting on his drives, and he knew he couldn't resist, so that's what he did. Now, he didn't really stand out as having extreme personality traits, suggesting that he did not have a personality disorder, but rather something from the realm of psychosis, like I talked about before. Now, we see Applewhite produces this final video. This was a video made not long before the deaths. This video is really quite revealing, albeit repetitive. The whole narrative was disorganized, consistent with schizophrenia. We see he would just lose track of what he was talking about and would start on a tangent. he would also connect ideas that were not conceptually similar. The final video had a number of other interesting aspects as well. I'll cover a few here. He said that most people would not understand what the cult was doing. Only certain people would be able to see it. So kind of connecting with this idea that he considered himself and his followers to be special. They were chosen among many people on Earth to have this chance to go to the spaceship. He refers to bodies as vehicles. He said the souls enter the bodies midlife, right? So he wasn't born who he was in that video. That body was already there, and he came from outer space and went into it. So essentially he took over the person of Marshall Applewhite. He said the mission was to get to the next evolutionary level above human. He used that term repeatedly in the video. So this was the kingdom of heaven. Only a person like Applewhite, who had come from that kingdom and entered a human body, could provide information to help people make it to that next level. Seems like a lot of work when he could have just sent a message or something, maybe like an email. But I guess being a messenger from outer space is one of those jobs where you really have to commit and kind of follow through and enter a body and do everything he did. He talked about how what the members were going to do was not suicide. They hated the world. What they were doing by ending their lives was returning to life. He talked about Earth as a temporary training ground, and he said the kingdom of heaven did not have mammals. The creatures there have no hair and no teeth. So he wasn't really doing a good job selling it there, but I guess the people in that room were already committed. After Applewhite does the first part of the speech, we see the camera goes on many of the group members. And in this part of the video, they are smiling, they're showing off their uniforms. We see this patch that says Away Team, the Heaven's Gate Away Team, a reference, of course, from Star Trek. Now, of course, those members believed that their behavior as an away team was taking place there. They were an away team while they were on Earth. So with all this information in mind, his background, these videos, we see one possible conceptualization would be that he had depression. He was confused with his own sexuality. He may have thought of himself as evil or bad, so there's real sense of shame that he had at some point. It also seems like he had psychosis, as I mentioned. He had persistent delusional beliefs about this idea that he was a savior, that he was from outer space, that he could transport everybody back to outer space. From looking at his history, one does get the sense that he truly believed what he was saying, as opposed to other cult leaders who manipulate but don't necessarily really believe the message. Now, Applewhite was manipulative, but at the same time delusional. Some cult leaders are only manipulative. They know that the message that they are teaching is not true. Applewhite used a lot of familiar tactics that other cult leaders have used, like isolation, finding vulnerable people, becoming increasingly dominant over time, making it seem as though his orders were the will of the group and not something he came up with on his own. But he diverged in one important area. Unlike other cult leaders, like Jim Jones, for example, Applewhite did not have armed guards. He didn't use physical force to cause death. He caused death solely with his power of manipulation, solely with his ability to sell the delusion that the people desperately needed to be true. I talked before about how there's a possibility that Applewhite and Nettles had shared psychotic disorder, also referred to as folie à deux. It's like their belief systems combined into this delusion. She brought the alien component, and he brought the religious component. They helped each other to make sense of their individual delusions, and again, kind of form a common delusion. When she died, he questioned his own beliefs. Her death threatened his delusion, but he was able to reform the delusions into something that he could once again believe. She may have given direction to his delusions by introducing the idea of UFOs and extraterrestrials, but he was able to maintain being independently delusional after her death. The construction of this delusion is also interesting. He took scripture and combined it with science fiction. At the time of making this video, the Heaven's Gate website is still operational, and we see the same logo on it that we saw back in 1997. The logo looks like a love child of a disco ball in a geometry textbook. It has the words Red Alert on it, like a reference to Star Trek, and on the bottom, the font looks like the intro to Star Wars. So here we see how this science fiction content, Star Trek, Star Wars, UFOs, and aliens, combines with his theological beliefs and becomes the content of his delusions, this really dangerous series of delusions. Now, as far as his supporters, the members of the Heaven's Gate cult, we don't know a lot about them like we do about Applewhite, but it does appear that they were highly agreeable, extremely gullible, vulnerable, dependent, subservient, and some probably had reality testing issues and low self-esteem. Earlier in Applewhite's career, he used the metaphor of a butterfly, right? So they were a caterpillar and they would become a butterfly in this transformation from human to whatever they were supposed to be if they went to the spaceship. We even see an early name of the cult was Human Individual Metamorphosis. So he really kind of touched on this idea that they were ugly and broken and he could restore them or turn them into something really incredible and beautiful, right? So he was really connecting with that low self-esteem. He was connecting with that sense of shame and offering what they believed was a good solution. Some of the members also were probably depressed. Usually if a person ends their life, it is at least to some degree due to depression. At the same time, they were laughing and smiling right before they died. So this may be much less about depression and much more about genuinely buying into a delusion and believing they were going to a spaceship. They were essentially victims of a terrible fraud. Applewhite's delusional behavior just pulled people in. Essentially, he was organized and grandiose enough to inflict his delusion upon other people while being paranoid enough to use isolation tactics, right? So it was really an unfortunate combination that delivered a horrific result for those people. So those are my thoughts on the Heaven's Gate cult and Marshall Applewhite. If you like this content, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to that in the description for this video. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.